Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Classical Academy Podcast, your friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Phillips. Listen, before we get started, if you are enjoying our podcast, please subscribe. Give us a review. Share the podcast with friends and family, anyone who might want to learn more about this great movement called classical Christian education. Today, St. Augustine, this guy who wrote an important work called Confessions. Who was St. Augustine? What was he confessing? My guest today will help us answer these questions. Dr. Andrew Selby is the chair of our Latin department here at Trinity. He also teaches medieval history and senior thesis. Now, a very fun fact about Andrew, he's one of those rare second-generation classical educators. His father actually wrote the classical composition. It's the writing curriculum we use right here at Trinity. So he has every reason to be a wonderful classical Christian educator, which he is. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
So who was St. Augustine, and what in the world was he confessing? People hear confessions, they think, oh, what was he guilty of? But it's kind of a different kind of confession in some ways. In others, that's dead on. Who was he? What was he confessing?
That's right. It's not that he committed some terrible, terrible crime and was sent up before the courts or something like that. But he did kind of commit some crimes and definitely committed his fair share of sins, yes. Which he openly acknowledges and explains in the confession. So the confessions has this dual meaning. On the one hand, it's just what we talked about. He's confessing his sins, saying, hey, this is how I've failed, and this is God's grace and his work in my life. But on the other hand, he's also confessing his faith. Like, what are the things that he really needs to believe in order to be fully a Christian? And one of the coolest things about Augustine is he's such a deep thinker. And he believed that if he's really going to have a religion that's going to satisfy his deepest longings, it would also have to satisfy him intellectually. It would have to be something that made sense.
Yes.
And so he went through a few different phases of different religions and philosophies, but finally he found in Christianity a religion that answered his deepest intellectual questions, not just his emotional and spiritual needs.
So in many ways, he was following along the lines of the apologists, wanting to satisfy the mind as well as the soul. So why do we study Augustine's Confessions? I mean, we're talking about high school students. Some of this stuff is really challenging. As you said, he's a very deep thinker, and it requires deep thought and hard work to study him.
Yeah.
Why do we study the Confessions here?
Yeah, in Augustine's Confessions, we perhaps have no better portrayal of the power of God's grace to rescue us from sinfulness. And we all need that in our lives. And looking at the model of Augustine, we see somebody who experienced doubt, experienced sin, experienced alienation from his friends and his family, and then had all of that restored by the work of God in his life through various means. So it's an amazing book because it can form your heart and your mind in equal measure.
So it's important, I think, to understand the context, obviously. What year did he write the Confessions? What was going on at the time? What influenced his thinking? What kind of thinking did he have to escape in order to come to Christ?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So he wrote the Confessions in the late 390s, and the reason he wrote it is because some people were attacking him as a pastor because they knew about his checkered past.
Yes.
And so he also wanted to say, like, no, really, I'm a changed man. So one of the things that he was really known for, he got very deeply involved in this cult called the Manichaeans. He grew up as a Christian, but as he grew up and he kind of followed in worldly ways, he was trying to advance his own career, trying to become the greatest rhetorician in the Roman world, which he basically achieved. But along the way, he fell into this cult called the Manichaeans. And the Manichaeans had this belief that the world is ultimately made up of two substances, good and evil, and they're in this perpetual conflict with one another. And the Manichaeans use this to describe different phenomena that you might see in the night sky. And they thought you should only eat certain foods but not others, because you could ingest good and not evil and that kind of thing. And so they had some views that seem sort of wacky to us, but at the time it was pretty persuasive to certain people. Augustine kind of liked this religion because they said that the body was definitely evil. Like, if there's a good spark in us, but our bodies are definitely evil. And this is a pretty common Gnostic view.
Yes.
And what that leads to is this. If your body's really evil, then can you really be held accountable for any bad things that you do with your body? And Augustine was a bit of a womanizer as well. He used his suave rhetoric not just to advance his career, but also to get in with the ladies.
Man. Yes.
And something that he was very apologetic about later. But he would justify his behavior in that area because he said, I can't help it. It's just the evil in me that's doing this along the way.
Very interesting. So now his mother was a Christian, Monica, her name, right? And I think he, at some point during the confessions, he said he was raised by weak women or something like that. Was this like an excuse he was using as to why he drifted into this cult, or what was he meaning by that? I mean, she seemed to really be a devout believer and raised him in that.
He completely disavowed that view later. He deeply respected his mother, actually.
Yes, exactly.
What he does say about her in his early years is that maybe she was pushing his career too much, and she really wanted him to succeed in school and was on him about that all the time. Wanted him to be famous and wealthy, and successful. And he said that later on she actually repented of that as well, and didn't want that for him. But one of the things about Monica is she's a wonderful example. In fact, my daughter is named Monica partially after Monica, Augustine's mother. Yeah, because I love the way that she consistently prayed for him. She fervently prayed for him. She never gave up on him. As many times as he turned his back on God and on her, yet she still was faithfully loved him, and she ends up being the one that really is the one that guides him back into the faith.
Yes.
And sets him on the course for the mission for the rest of his life after he became a Christian.
He definitely admired her faith. And now, so it's confessions is a journey. As you say, he's confessing his sins. He's confessing his journey to God. He always believed in God, and in many ways as a matter of degree of coming back to the faith. What was something significant happened that helped him escape the Manichaean cult? What was that, and how did that help him, this Neoplatonic idea? Explain what Neoplatonic is and how, when he was introduced to that, it helped him escape and actually get back on the road toward Christ.
You're a good reader of Confessions. That's exactly what's happening in Confessions. Okay, so with that Manichaean dualism, what really helped him with that is he explored the nature of sin, and he wasn't content with his own sin. He realized there was something more to it, and he had this incident early in his life where he and a bunch of his friends hopped a fence, went over and found this pear tree in his neighbor's yard. They plucked all the pears off of it and went and threw the pears to some pigs. And he said, and later on he was reflecting on that event, and he was like, why did I do that? Like, it wasn't even that fun, but he thought, it's because I wanted to be in with my friends, but it's also because I just wanted to take something good and see it burn. See it be destroyed. And this led to, once he encountered the Neoplatonists, they started to offer him some answers. Now, Neoplatonists believed that there's not good and evil in the world, but there's just one thing. There's the good. And there's emanations of the good. So they're not Christians, but they're on the way.
Very close.
And and there's something about them that resonated with Augustine, and he realized that, no, I think good is the only real principle. And we just take things that are good and we twist them around. And that's what evil is. So he ended up coming to this arresting line in the Confessions where he says, evil is nothing. And we all think, whoa, now I've experienced evil. Like, I don't think evil is nothing. But he says, no, it's nothing in the sense that everything around us is good. God created the entire world good. And what we do when we do evil is we take those good gifts that he's given us and we twist them. We use them in the wrong way. We use them to manipulate our neighbor. We use them to advance ourselves over others. We use them to satisfy our own lusts and desires instead of using them the right way that they ought to be used.
Yes.
And so the Neoplatonists helped give him this idea of good, but they still, he found their philosophy lacking as well. And he has this image towards the end of the Confessions where he says, the Neoplatonists are like a man who can see a distant island to which they want to get, to the distant island that will give them happiness, but they have no means of getting there. And so he felt despair as a Neoplatonist once he had kind of converted away from Manichaeanism and into Neoplatonism.
Right.
But that's when the influence of Ambrose, who was the Bishop of Milan, where he was practicing where Augustine was practicing as a rhetorician, came in and offered him some teaching that helped him see that the way to get from our sinful state to that glorious distant island was actually God himself.
Yes.
In the person of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
That Jesus Christ himself was the good who became incarnate and became one of us. And by his death on the cross that satisfied the payment and penalty for our sin, he actually provided the way to happiness. So Christ is himself both the end and the way. And it's in that recognition that Augustine finally was set free from his sins and was able to leave behind him his sins and had a grand new vocation of really coming home and becoming a pastor and living out the rest of his life in service of the church.
Hence the wonderful journey of confession. So we have him born in this with a Christian mother, and she raised him such. He, however, pushes him toward this to be a super successful rhetorician, right, and become famous, and he drifts off into the Manichaeanism. The Neoplatonic thought kind of helps him escape from that. Ambrose comes along and shows him the way. Are there other key turning points? Are those pretty much the biggies, or anything else that would kind of fill in the gaps of his journey?
Not really any other turning points that I would like to point out, but I do think that it's worth mentioning the way that Augustine writes this entire book. It's all in the second person, right? He's addressing God the entire time. The very first line is, "Great are you, Lord, and greatly to be praised." And he's quoting the Psalms when he does that.
Yes.
And throughout the Confessions, Augustine interlaces scripture as he's confessing to God, what he did, the ways that he was wandering away from God, and then the ways that God was drawing him back. And he talks about, he talks to God through the whole thing. He said, he'll often say something like, Lord, how I was in those days when I was chasing after women, or when I was deceived by the Manichaeans, or when I had some of the answers, but not all of them in Neoplatonism. He constantly is referring to God that way, and it's a wonderful example for us and for our students of how to think very, very deeply, and how to think in front of God, how to articulate our thoughts in such a way that we're laying them bare to God and asking him to also help us and correct us in our thinking, guide us and give us insight, and that prayerful thoughtfulness is a wonderful model for how to do every area of academia, and a standard we should all hold ourselves to.
Yes. So it's a wonderful, in many ways it exposes us to the lures that can pull us away from Christ. But as you said, through this prayer model, God is ever present in the midst of those lures, and you can always turn to him. And so it makes me wonder, how does this affect the students? How does studying confessions, what do you as a professor observing them, how do you see them being affected by studying the confessions?
Yeah, there's a number of ways. One of the things I always like to draw out is the similarities that these students already have to Augustine. Oh, yeah. Because at Trinity, every student in here has at least one parent who confesses to be a Christian.
Yes.
And actually, that's exactly what Augustine had. His father was not a Christian,
right,
but his mother was. And he received a first-class classical education.
Yes.
And he grew up pretty well-to-do. and he was ambitious to succeed in his career. We have very ambitious students here at Trinity, and he was very much lured by a world that wasn't very Christian. I mean, he lived in the tail end of the Roman Empire, and while the Roman Empire at this point was officially Christian, probably only about 40 or maybe 50% of the citizens of the Roman Empire were actually Christians, and of them, not that many were mature yet. The church was still in an early phase,
Right.
So Augustine was very much like our students, and so I see them beginning to examine some of the assumptions that they've had about their life and where they're headed in their life, and begin to wonder, is this really the right way to go? Or should I, how should I think about my career? How should I think about the opposite sex? How should I think about my family? How should I think about the church? And all those things are all wrapped up in Augustine's life, and he portrays everything so vividly with such beautiful language that it really makes the students think about their own lives and reflect on whether they're headed in the right direction. So I see a lot of introspection from students when they encounter this text.
We like to encourage the listeners to read and study the things that the students are reading and studying. With confessions, is it okay? Is it safe for people to read these on their own, or should they really have some good instruction going along with it? And I really mean that. I mean, I always encourage people, every time we have these podcasts, this makes you want to read this. You should check it out. But what about confessions? Is it a safe thing to read? Because much of it is difficult to understand, and you don't want to take away an improper view of Christianity. Yeah,
that's a fair point. A couple of quotes come to mind. One is, in Narnia, there's that famous quote that Mr. Beaver gives to the children who stumble into Narnia, and they're asking about Aslan, this great lion, and they ask, "Is he safe?" And Mr. Beaver says, "Well, he's not safe, but he's good." And that's true of Aslan in Narnia, and it's true of God. And I think you can say, in some ways, the Confessions is a little like that as well. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be difficult, and it's coming from a perspective that's quite different than our own, insofar as Augustine is writing 1,600 years ago in the Roman Empire. It's a different context, and so there are going to be some different assumptions. However, that book is one of the most foundational books of Western society. So a lot of the reasons we have some of the thoughts about Christianity that we have, some of the reason we use the language we use, is actually from this book.
Yes.
So in some ways, when we read Confessions, we're going back to the foundations of Western Christian intellectual culture. And so I don't know, that seems safe in a way.
How critical, too.
Yeah, and critical.
How critical to know the world that we're supposed to be living in the Western world. And I think it helps us understand what the assaults on the Western world look like by knowing what the real thing, what the real foundations look like. So if you are a parent out there and your student is studying Confessions, I think Dr. Selby would agree with me. Maybe you should be reading it with them, or certainly reading along as they study it, because it will help you understand the Western world, which is supposed to be the world in which we find ourselves.
Absolutely. It's also a wonderful opportunity for parents to talk about the purposefulness of their students' lives. Sometimes in the hurly-burly of just trying to get your kids to school and just trying to give them the opportunities that we want them to have to be successful, sometimes we can miss having those big conversations with them. This book is a great opportunity to ask, well, why are we doing these things? What good is study? What good is your classical Christian education? What's it all for? And Augustine just drives home purposefulness. What is the purpose of our lives? What's the purpose of the pursuits that we have? And gives us a critical eye, asks some hard questions of us. So it's a wonderful opportunity, I think, for parents to touch on this with their high school students who are on the cusp of adulthood, and have some meaningful conversation about where are you headed?
That's fantastic.
Where are you going?
Sure. So speaking of questions, I'm a parent. I have a student studying Confessions. What might be some questions I should ask them about Confessions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one really important question to answer is, or to ask, is what is evil and what is good? And getting back to that fundamental question, I think that's really helpful because it's easy for us to blame things that are outside of ourselves when we do bad things.
Sure. The woman you gave me, the serpent.
Yeah. It's,
yeah.
And so it's easy to blame others for, or external circumstances for our own moral failings. And so if you answer that question about what is evil well, and Augustine can guide us into that, then it helps us to take responsibility for our own actions. I think that's an important one. I think another really important question is to ask, what do you love? One of Augustine's key ideas is this idea of love, of caritas in the Latin. And in love, he diagnoses his own disorder and his own waywardness in many ways because of what he calls his disordered loves, that he didn't have things in the right priorities in his life. And so he's also very famous for later on talking about the ordo amoris, the order of love that we ought to have, and that God is our first and love. And if he's not in that place, if God is not truly the end of all our strivings, then anything else that we might strive for, any other good things even that we're looking for in our life, whether it's a good career, whether it's a good marriage, whatever that might be, these are all genuinely good things, Augustine would agree, those can become obstacles for us. The very things that we end up loving, if we don't love them properly, if they're not in the right place, they end up getting corrupted. One of the things I constantly tell students when we're studying confessions, or ask them and lead them into, is what if you find this guy or this girl eventually, and you just fall so deeply in love, right? And that she becomes the object of all your affections, and she becomes the end of you. Is that fair to her? And the answer is no way. Like, we can't satisfy somebody else that way, right? If my wife were looking to me for all of her happiness, that'd be pretty rough for her.
Correct.
Not going to lie. But if God is the source of our happiness, then we can start to love other people appropriately and expect the right kind of response from them, and not overburden what we're expecting to get out of them. Or that could be the food that we eat, or the sports that we play. All those things kind of fall into the right places once our order of loves gets right. So if you can ask your student, what do you love? What are the priorities of the things that you should love?
Wonderful.
That would be a very Augustinian question to ask.
Fantastic. Okay, so all of you out there, you can be Augustinian parents now and ask those good questions. And hopefully this has inspired you to look into reading confessions yourself. Hopefully it gives you great encouragement to know that your students have such a fine teacher helping the students read through this wonderful confession, his journey from Christ, away from Christ, back to Christ in a much deeper way. And hopefully it'll help you do the same. So we are really grateful to have you here with us, Dr. Selby. Thank you for this wonderful time.
Yeah, hey, my pleasure. Can I read just one quote from Augustine?
Would love it.
Okay, this is a very famous quote, but I think it sums up a lot of what we talked about.
Would love it.
He writes this right at the beginning. Man, a little piece of your creation, desires to praise you, O God. You stir man to take pleasure in praising you, because you have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you.
Amen. Thank you for joining us on the Classical Academy podcast, presented by Trinity U, a service of Trinity Classical Academy in Santa Clarita, California. Our producer is Shay Ramquist. Stephen Petrie is our audio engineer and provides our original music you hear right now. So until next time, let's all continue to grow in wisdom, in virtue, in purpose, and in the love of God. Till next time.